welcome back to our reading of The Library of Ever by Zeno Alexander. I'm so excited that you are back with us, and if you didn't get a chance to watch the other two videos, you can still do so. They're still on our Facebook page, and you can still get caught up. And if you watch all these videos, you get to count this book towards your summer reading. And then at the end of the two chapters that we're going to be reading 5 and 6 today. We're going to be doing, I'm going to give you a challenge for a STEM project that you're going to make a robot to go on top of a Sphero. And we're going to get into that at the end of the video. So let's get right into it. I hope that you enjoy chapters 5 and 6 of The Library of Ever. Chapter 5. Lenora Saves the Day. The throne room's hysterical crowd erupted with shouts and cries. The court scientist released the lever and looked at the king. Lenora tried to continue speaking but couldn't hear herself or anything else over the crowd's bedlam. She whirled to face them. "Everyone, please, shh!" Instantly, the crowd went dead silent and looked wide-eyed at Lenora. She felt a little guilty, but really, a librarian had a right to a bit of silence when needed. She turned to the king. "It isn't February 29th, Your Majesty," she said. "It's March 1st. The court mathematician smirked. "Wrong, librarian. The math proves it." "No, the history proves it," explained the court historian. More gasps. And Lenora looked around to see everyone on the tips of their toes leaning forward, awaiting her response. Her mind raced with the facts she had read in the calendar book. "Neither one proves it alone," she said carefully. "You have to take both together. Leap years don't always come every 4 years. According to the rules, century years, like 1800 and 1900, are not leap years, but this is a century year," interrupted the court historian. "It's 8,000. Make up your mind." "As I was about to say," Lenora said, determined to be patient and professional, "that rule switches every 400 years. 16,000 and 2,000, for example, were both leap years." "Fine," said the court mathematician rudely. "The math still says 8,000 is one of those years." "Not quite," said Lenora, pointing a finger to the sky. She reached her dramatic conclusion. "There is something the scientists who built the screen must not have known. By the year 4000, the calendar would have been a day off, unless they added a rule that switches everything 4,000 years. That means 8,000, like 4,000 and 12,000, must be a common year." "I assume," mused the king, "that a common year is anything that is not a leap year?" "Correct," said Lenora. "Clearly this librarian knows her calendars." The king looked at his mathematician and historian, who appeared rather ashamed of themselves, and were staring studiously at their toes. "If there are no objections, we shall reset the date to March 1st. Relief flooded Lenora, but at the same time, she felt that something was still wrong. They had yet to solve the real problem. She could see herself returning there in 12,000 and then 16,000 and on, to solve the same exact problem every time. "Pardon me, Your Majesty," she said, "but I don't think you should reset the screen. I think you should take it down." "Why ever would we do that?" asked the king in surprise. "Because," said Lenora, "you don't want to depend on the screen, do you? It would just mean more confusion 4,000 years from now." "Very wise," said the king. He turned to the court scientist. "Bring down the screen," he ordered. "From this day forward, We will learn to tell dates ourselves." There was a general cheering. At this time, Lenora didn't shush the crowd. In the midst of the celebration, the king approached Lenora with a laurel wreath and placed it on her head. "You have served me well. I hereby appoint you my court librarian." The roars grew louder. Lenora felt a humming just above her heart. She looked down at the badge. Third Assistant Apprentice Librarian, Official Court Librarian of the Kingdom of Starpoint 17. Third Assistant, Lenora thought happily. Only her first day on her job, and she'd already been promoted. Which reminded her she really must get back to the help desk. She looked about for Benedict Fran and saw that he had been pulled into a corner by a short elderly woman with a door features and too tight overcoat and a black bowler hat jammed into her head. She was whispering to the robot's ear and glancing at Lenora. Lenora stared at the pair, then stopped. Her arm was suddenly covered in goosebumps. The woman in the too tight overcoat and bowler hat reminded her very much of the man she'd encountered outside of the astrophysics room at the library back home. She chilled Lenora through and through. Though she had a badge saying librarian spelled correctly this time, Lenora could not imagine what business she had in the courts of the king at Starpoint 17. The woman glanced again at Lenora. For a moment, their gazes locked, and something behind her eyes flickered twice. And across her shoulders, something slithered beneath the overcoat. Lenora, to her shame, froze on the spot. The woman spoke to Benedict Fran for a moment longer, then patted him on the back and trotted down a narrow corridor and out of sight. Gathering herself, and furious that the woman had frightened her for a moment, Lenora went to Benedict Fran. "Who was that?" "I must say your boss there is an extremely curious librarian," said the robot. "What?" asked Lenora, outraged. That woman was not her boss. Or was she? Lenora didn't really know much about how the library worked yet, but she was certain that Malachi would have told her about this woman. And Lenora really did not believe she was a librarian, whatever her badge might say. Thinking these things, she wasn't really listening as Benedict Fran told her the woman said that there was an emergency in Lenora's section and she should return immediately. By the time the robot's words sank in for Lenora, he was already reaching for the time machine on his wrist. "When was it again that I got you?" "Ah, yes, she instructed me very specifically. October 5th, 1582. He touched the device. "No!" shouted Lenora. She grabbed for the time machine, but it was too late. She found herself tumbling through a dark void. Benedict Fran spinning beside her. All around them was nothingness, stretching on for forever. And somewhere in the far distance was a faint but growing rumbling. "What happened?" cried the robot. "There was no October 5th, 1582, said Lenora. The woman in the bowler hat had done this on purpose, it was clear. And Lenora was sure she would find out soon. There were still goosebumps on her arm and a flickering sense in her stomach. That peril was near, and that rumbling was turning into a roar. "But how can that be?" said Benedict Fran. "Because the ancient Romans got the length of the year wrong," said Lenora, her eyes darting about for the danger she was sure would crop by at any moment. They were 11 minutes off. By 1582, things had gotten so messed up that the Pope had to start a new calendar entirely and skip 10 days while he was at it. "You know, I really think we should get out of here." "Agreed," said the robot. He touched the device, but nothing happened. His eyes began to blink in a crimson alarm. "What's wrong?" asked Lenora with dread. "The void seems to be draining power from my time machine," Benedict Fran said. "I've got almost nothing left." "What does that mean?" asked Lenora. "How do we get out without your time machine?" The robot shook his head. We don't. I'm afraid we're lost in time and space forever, Lenora. Well, not forever. That roar you hear, which the robot was now having to shout over, is the void reacting to the presence of matter, by which I mean us. Eventually, it will rip us up into nothing too. Lenora didn't like the sound of that. The roar was now a howling. Her skin tingled. She looked down at her arm and saw it was fading into nothing. She looked at Benedict Fran. He was fading into nothing too. I'm sorry, shouted Benedict Fran over the deafening howl. This is all my fault. No time for that, yelled Lenora. The howl was making her skull rattle, and Lenora could barely see Benedict Fran or herself. She thought quickly. You said your time machine had almost nothing left. Does that mean it has a little left? Yes, cried the robot, but almost nothing. We'd never get you back to your real time. We don't have to, screamed Lenora over the din. Her arm was only a dim outline now, and she could barely see Benedict Fran. There was an October 4th. Is there enough power to move it just one day? The robot's eyes flashed faintly, and he grasped desperately at his wrist. Suddenly, they were standing in a dark forest, the ground covered with an early snow. In front of them stood a girl in a yellow cloak, her arms full of firewood. Her jaw dropped, and so did the wood. Power restored, said Benedict Fran happily. Pardon us, said Lenora to the girl, but we must be leaving. Here, she said to the robot, who was reaching for his wrist. You'd better let me do that. She entered the date herself, and in moments they were back at the help desk and calendar section. Lenora collapsed on her padded stool in weary relief. My apologies, Lenora, said the robot, his eyes now blinking a sad blue. I should not have listened to that strange woman. Lenora stroked his hand reassuringly. All is well. I made it home, and you could not have known she was lying. Still, said Benedict Fran, you should be careful, Lenora. It seems you have an enemy. I will, replied Lenora, wondering who the woman in the bowler hat was, and if she would be seeing her or the other man again. She rather suspected she would. As for me, said Benedict Fran, bowing deeply, you have saved the kingdom and both our lives. I am truly impressed and grateful. Tell me, would you consider voyaging through time with me, running errands for the king? It's rather interesting work. My next assignment is to see whether the Battle of Pelusium was really fought with cats. For a moment, Lenora was tempted, imagining all the wonderful times she could visit alongside her new friend. She looked around at the calendars section, and her heart fluttered to think of all that lay ahead of her in the library. Maybe later, she said. I can't just abandon my job like that. I have a lot of responsibilities, and I love the work, even if it did strand her in time and space now and then. I understand, said the robot. Perhaps we shall meet again. Now I must return home as well. Wait, said Lenora. Don't you think you should go find your missing chip first? I have a feeling you'll get in all sorts of trouble if you don't. Of course, said the robot. Where was it again? Ancient Egypt, the Sphinx. You bashed your head? Right, exclaimed the robot. Reaching for his wrist, in a flash, he was gone. And in his place stood Malachi. Chapter 6. Lenora Takes to the Skies. Malachi read aloud from Lenora's badge. Third assistant apprentice already, I see. You've done well, Lenora. The corner of the chief answerer's mouth almost twitched into a smile. But you mustn't be content to rest on your laurels. We have a problem, and I think you might be just the one to solve it. And I think the librarian in cartography section has a quilt and a huff. Has quit and a huff. And on the worst day possible. We just got a brand new globe delivered, and huge crowds have come to see it. It must be some globe, Lenora said, impressed. Indeed, said Malachi, and there is no one to answer their questions. The help desk is swamped. This will be a challenging assignment. Do you think you can manage it? Yes, Lenora replied instantly, though in her heart she was not quite sure. Excellent, said Malachi. Follow me. They left calendars and went into the hallway. They soon came to a platform from which the stairs wound off in all directions, up and down. They hurried down some steps. Up some steps? Lenora had completely lost her way at this point. She thought the maze of stairways could use a few signs, and tiptoed through the vast reading room in which hundreds of people were studiously bent over books in perfect silence. Lenora looked at all the people reading and learning, and thought about the words, knowledge is a light, and what they might mean. She remembered Starpoint 17's giant glowing calendar in the sky, and wondered if the phrase meant that knowledge is like the sun in the sky, shining down on everything. But no, that didn't seem quite right somehow. She continued to ponder this as they left the reading room, and found themselves in another large hallway lined with bookshelves. They passed two rooms that appeared to be completely empty. Above the first sign was shrinking room. Librarians were going into it, but none were coming out. The other was the unshrinking room, and it was quite the opposite. What are those for? Asked Lenora. Some of our small patrons are very small, replied Malachi. She came to a halt at the end of the hallway, where it formed a T with another hallway, equally large, along which an enormous stream of library patrons was hurrying. You can find your way from here. Simply follow the crowd. With that, she whirled away and was gone. Cartography was not difficult to find. Everyone was flowing in the same direction, talking excitedly about the new globe. Children were pulling their parents along by the hand. Soon they were rushing down a set of wide, sweeping steps and then across a bridge that arched over a brook of babbling water. Lenora paused briefly because she knew cartography needed her for a look. At the other end of the bridge, where the hallway resumed, was a set of steps going down to a dock with several empty canoes. The brook had the most inviting grassy banks. Lenora assumed they somehow got enough sun from the skylights above, and it curved under the bridge before going around the bend. Down the brook, the patrons were paddling canoes. A sign on the dock said hydrology. There you go. With an arrow pointing downstream. Lenora was tempted to grab a paddle and voyage off, but she had a job to do. The scientific study of the movement of water on the Earth and other planets would have to wait for another time. She reached cartography and gasped. The room was far bigger than any room Lenora had ever seen. All along the walls, going up and up, were thousands of maps of every possible description. Patrons were walking about on walkways, stairs, and ramps, studying the maps. Far, far above what must have been miles of maps and walkways was the hint of a ceiling hung with twinkling lights. A journey across this room would be no small undertaking. But even this space was nearly filled by its simply magnificent globe, which could really be described as a small world floating with great dignity in the center of the room and rotating slowly. There was a huge sign beneath it, World's Largest Globe. Underneath, in smaller letters, it said, Raised Relief. Lenora hardly had time to admire any of this. She spotted the help desk right away, with a long line of desperate-looking questioners, waving library cards and shuffling impatiently. She hurried, having no doubt the line might move a little faster if only the globe were a little smaller. How could she be expected to make use of such a globe when she couldn't even reach it? She soon found the answer. Behind the help desk bobbled a glass balloon with a basket beneath it into which one librarian could fit nicely. It drifted back and forth, tugging at a rope that anchored to the next floor. A small set of steps led up to the basket. Next to the steps was a sign, "Librarians only." She felt a tug at her arm. It was a forlorn looking young man with a tricorn hat in his hand. Sadness and regret came over him in waves. "Hello," said Lenora. "How may I help you?" She did really want to help this poor, sad man. "Please, librarian," stammered the patron, turning his hat in his hands. "There was a girl I loved, and I never told her. Now she has moved far away, and I want to tell her, but I don't know where to send the letter. And all I know is that she moved to a place with the longest name in the world, and I don't know where that is." Lenora pondered this. She didn't know either, but it was her job to find out. She looked around, but none of the maps in her vicinity looked like they would help with this question. She turned towards the glass balloon with great trepidation. She had absolutely no idea how to work a glass balloon, particularly not this one, which had attachments like cells and wings connected to the ropes connected to dozens of levers on a control board in the basket. It looked unimaginably complicated. She searched for instructions but couldn't find a thing. No wonder the previous librarian quit in such a huff, thought Lenora. But there was nothing for it. She certainly wasn't quitting the best job she'd ever had. She had to figure it out. She climbed a board, terms connected to the balloons like ballast and envelope went through her head, but she had no idea what they meant. She tried to sort through the levers, none of which bothered with helpful things like labels or directions. She found that one was connected to the rope anchoring the balloon on the floor. She gave it a hopeful pull, and in an instant the balloon shot up into the air and the help desk dwindled away below. A strange thing happened. As Lenora got closer to the orb, gravity simply switched from the earth to the globe. The balloon rotated until the globe was no longer above her, but below. Now she was soaring over the blue ocean and then a long coastline with the floor and walls of the cartography section forming the sky. She was astonished to see below a school of fish swimming by, ignoring her completely. The balloon was going faster and faster, and the ocean rocked by. The coastline blurred past. Lenora pulled desperately at the levers of its wings flapped and sails unfurled. She was thrown back and forth in the basket as the balloon jerked about wildly, completely out of control. "This will never work," thought Lenora. She wasn't sure that whoever built this balloon was really the right person for the job, but she would simply have to make the best of it. The balloon was proving useless, but she had to get an answer for that sad young man. She searched and searched until she found one lever that lifted flaps and briefly brought the balloon to a lurching halt. Then she clambered to the edge of the basket, swayed for a moment, and jumped. Next week, we will read chapters 7 and 8, and we will do a brand new STEM project, and we will also use what STEM project you used today, what you created, you'll have from today until next Tuesday to create this STEM project and bring it to the library, and we're going to test it, and we're going to video us using your robot or this other thing that I'm going to talk about. Okay, you ready for me to get into the STEM project? Okay, so we have these spheros. They look like this, and they're about 3 inches tall all the way around, okay? And so what the challenge is, we have 2 challenges. So you can do 1 or you can do number 2. So the first one is that you're going to make something that can sit on top of the sphero. And we're calling it a robot. You're going to make a robot. But you're just making the part that sits on top of the sphero. And then we are going to move around the sphero, and we're going to see if we can drive the sphero with what you created on top of it and see if it falls off or not. So if it doesn't fall off, you get 15 seconds. It has to stay on top of the sphero for 15 seconds driving. So in other words, it has to be something that gently sits on top of it while the sphero moves like this, and while it's driving, and it can't fall off. So that's challenge number 1. Challenge number 2 is to create a ramp. It can only be 6 inches high. So this is 3 inches high. And then if you make a ramp, it can only be 6 inches high. Okay, that way we don't hurt the spheros. But if you make a ramp that's at least that's under 6 inches or under, then we will see if we can drive the sphero over the ramp. So we're going to use your ramp, and we're going to video it in next week's video. And we're going to go over the ramp with the sphero. So let's see if you can come up with something, either to sit on top of the sphero as like a robot, to create a robot, or to create a ramp. And then we're going to see if it drives over the ramp. Okay, so that means that your ramp, it can't be too difficult for the sphere to get on top of it. And it can't be over 6 inches. And that it just kind of glides right over the ramp. Okay, so just for a little demonstration, so we've been making little pipe cleaners. This is actually what I made in last week's story time. But making like just out of pipe cleaners, you can make little things to sit on top of your robot and see if it'll move with that. Some of our pipe cleaners worked and some of them didn't. Some of our little pipe cleaner creations. So pipe cleaners might work, straws might work, or you just might find something completely new that won't fall off of the sphero as it drives. So get your creative engineering brains working and see what you can come up with. And if you come up with something really cool, then we will video it in next week's reading. Alright, well that's all I have for you today. I hope that you really enjoyed that and get excited about creating either a robot or a ramp.